cultural context has come full circle. 1 second as I plug myself in. So this morning, it being a 5th Shabbat and wishing a Memorial Day of meaning and relaxation to everyone, we like to switch up what we do from our usual pattern. So of course, first Shabbat is yoga meditation, second and fourth Shabbatot are liberal minyan, third Shabbat is our traditional egalitarian minyan, but not every month is so blessed to have 5 Shabbatot in it. So what does CBST do when we've got a 5th Shabbat of the month? Our clergy team tries to do something special. And what we've been doing thus far is alternating between a learner's minyan and Torah study. And we figure that's a nice way to sort of spread the spectrum. That's an opportunity for those for whom Shabbat practice is newer or they're looking to deepen their practice to get an opportunity to really study the structure of the service and increase their intimacy and their familiarity in a space that is set for learning, where questions are welcome and pauses are taken instead of just the deep end of the pool with the full Shabbat service. And then we also wanted to pitch very high that, when there's an opportunity on a 5th Shabbat of the month, we take the entire time to go really, really deep into the Torah portion. Obviously, we love learning Torah, but in the context of the full service, we can often only devote 15, 20 minutes to a drasha or a Torah discussion. So what a lovely chance for us to be able to really steep ourselves in Torah and be sort of singular in our focus. The plan this morning, as it has been at other Torah studies, is that we will open and dedicate our study to all of those who are in need of healing. And we'll open with a Mishaberach, so there'll be an opportunity to share names and to pray for the healing of those we love. And then at the close of our service, we have a full minyan present. We will be reciting Mourner's Kaddish, and if it is your custom and if there is someone for whom you would like to recite Kaddish this morning, you have the opportunity to do so surrounded by friends and community, and of course also to share the names for blessing of those you remember. And in between, we'll study Torah. So how does this sound? Excellent. Let us begin with our Mishaberach. It is customary to study Torah in honor of someone is the highest honor that you can give a person in this life or in Olam Haba, in the world to come. And so it is particularly meaningful for us to be able to study in honor of those who are in need of healing. And this is considered kind of an apex moment in Jewish experience. There is little we do that is more exciting and more important and more sacred than the study of Torah. So I want to invite everybody who is praying for the healing of someone's body, mind, or spirit to share their names in the chat. And I'm going to be singing Debbie Friedman's Mishaberach. I'm going to pause in between the verses to share the names of those who are on our refuah list at CBST. And of course, to say all of those who are mentioned in the chat today. And then we'll close. Mishaberach avotenu Makor habracha leimotenu. May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. On this Shabbat, we pray for the healing of everyone whose names we have shared in the chat, and for Kathy Binder, Johnson Kata, Nancy Eisenoff, Chaim Shalom Ben Freda, Joan Friedman, Stuart Isikoff, Linda Kanapensky, Myrna Klein, Morris Levy, Justine Loeb, Saul Mizrahi, John Musco, Monique Prince, Susan Ricken, Trix Rosen, Liz Scott, Gary Sharkey, Elena Schumann, Pam Trester, Urvashi Vad, Rose Wannen, and Jay Weinstein. Mi sheberach imotenu mekor habracha leavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of the spirit, and let us say, Amen. To open our Torah study this morning, we have a special one-line blessing for the study and the immersion in Torah. This is a different blessing than when we're doing a formal Torah reading. And this says, after the standard bracha formula, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, that we are completing a mitzvah, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, who has commanded us, la'asok b'divrei Torah, to occupy ourselves, to make it our profession, and also to soak ourselves. It's not actually what the Hebrew means, but it's a delightful homophone with the English, to soak ourselves in words of Torah. So you can feel free to repeat after me or recite along with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So let us begin. A homophone means it sounds the same, but it is not a homonym, which is the same meaning. So the fact that la'asok sounds like the English word soak is a fabulous coincidence that has nothing to do with the actual meaning of the Hebrew, but it is a homophone because it's got the sound of the word soak in it. And if there is anybody who would like to add additional dedications for their study this morning, as Dorina has very sweetly, to Shep's mom, Rose, for whom we pray for comfort and ease and healing, and all in our community who need healing, please, by all means do so. It's a very sweet and honorable thing to do. So we are in the book of Numbers. And the ironic thing about the naming of the book of Numbers is it starts with an entire census of the children of Israel. So we have their entire enumerated population. And then over the book of Numbers, that number goes down, 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 down. And this has to do with the many trials and tribulations that the children of Israel go through on their journey, Bamidbar, in the wilderness, which is one of the reasons why the book of Numbers in Hebrew is not titled Misparim, is not titled Numbers. It's titled Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. It is the setting for the entire book. And it also, it's the first helpful word in the first sentence of the book, which is how we name books of the Torah in Hebrew. In this particular Torah portion, we're in Beha'Alotcha, and highlights of this Torah portion include a lot of grumbling. There are those who claim that they have exclusive rights to prophecy, and their names are not Moses, Miriam, and Aaron. So you can imagine how frightening and upsetting this is for a solidified base of power as named by God. There are many accusations hurled about that we were taken out of the land of Egypt, and people have a particularly rosy view backwards of the land of Egypt, that there were delicious things to eat there, like melons and cucumbers and fish. And that's all anybody seems to remember about being enslaved for perhaps 400 years. But the desert is looking pretty bleak, and the manna is tasting pretty boring, and people are wishing and desiring for the world that they knew. And so they're accusing Moses and God and the leadership of just leading them around in circles and leaving them to die in the wilderness. And it's a very stressful time for everybody. Even Moses's closest companions, his brother and sister, Miriam and Aaron, have some griping to do. They are whispering about Moses's relationship with a woman named Keturah, which is not the name that we heard previously of Moses's wife, which is Zipporah. And so there are questions, is this a separate woman? What exactly happened to Zipporah? What is the character of the gossip that's going around about Moses's relationship? And God will have none of it and strikes Miriam, not Aaron, with Sara'at, also colloquially known as leprosy, and Miriam has to be outside the boundaries of the camp until her Sara'at is healed. And Moses prays for her recovery, a very famous line, Elna Rafana la, God, please heal her, please. And so this might be one of the very shortest prayers we have in all of Jewish prayer history. It's only 5 words and not very many letters at that. But it sounds like a real expression of Moses's soul being so distressed at the fate of his sister. None of this is what we're going to study today. I wanted to make sure that everybody had some context of what's going on in the background in Beha'Alotcha. Obviously, with any Torah portion, there is so much that we could choose to delve in deeply, or we could skate superficially over the entirety. But there's lots and lots of material to cover. So there is a famous saying describing Rabbi Akiva, one of our very favorite Talmudic sages, that Akiva was able to make Torah out of every jot and tittle, every crown, every serif, every letter in the Torah. Akiva could make mounds and mounds of knowledge. And what we are going to be studying today is one punctuation mark that occurs in this Torah portion. So if we were going to laser focus on one punctuation mark, I felt like everyone was owed an explanation of what on earth is going on around in the Torah portion. But how often do we get a chance to fully focus on something seemingly as inconsequential, but hopefully by the end of our study today, I will have convinced you that it is of utmost importance, of one punctuation mark in the Torah. And there are those who might say to me, Rabbi Rapport, I've seen my share of Torah scrolls, and one feature I can tell you about them consistently is that there are no punctuation marks. There are no dageshim, there are no dots that indicate if something is a bet or a vet. There are no vowels, which makes the learning and the chanting of Torah a real endeavor. And let me tell you, Rabbi Rapport, there are no punctuation marks. There are not even periods or colons that indicate when one sentence ends and another sentence begins. But there are just a few punctuations in every Torah scroll that our scribes put in, that the Masoretes, who sort of codified what the Torah should look like, all agreed upon. We usually don't even notice them. We're usually too far away from them to be able to see. It's usually only the Torah reader and the Gabaim who are physically proximate enough to be able to look inside the scroll at that level. And that's what we're going to be studying today, because all of us are on Zoom. All of us have the same distance and access to Torah. It's a remarkable blessing. And so let us begin with a little context and see if you can spot the punctuation mark of which I speak. I'm sharing Safaria so that everybody, oops, come here. Fine. I took that away. Sorry, friends. Going back here. Okay. Everybody can see Safaria. Everybody can see all of the punctuation marks. You can see the vowels. You can see the trope marks. You can see the dageshim. Like the letter tav doesn't always come with a belly button, and that belly button is called a dagesh. In Ashkenazi Hebrew, that would differentiate between a tav with a T sound and a sav with an S sound. But everybody can see that, right? Sharon, are you reading my mind and offering to be an English reader, or did you have a question?
Oh, I can be an English reader, and I wanted to say what I thought was a mark I don't see usually, or so I'll read the English.
Okay, but did you see a mark that you don't?
Well, at the very end, there's those 2 little triangle things.
two little triangle things.
The very end, the last word, right? You see
The
that?
colon.
It looks like a colon.
Oh, yes,
but in
that is a
triangle.
colon. That is a fancy typographic version of a colon. It's just a
Right.
different font.
Right. So that's a colon. Is a colon a punctuation
A
mark?
colon is absolutely a punctuation mark. You are correct. However, when I show you the Torah scroll itself, you're not going to see that colon.
Okay.
But it's a
so
very good guess.
Then
This
I'm
is-
going to go on and read in English.
Yes, please. So this is, I'm giving you a couple sentences before the strange punctuation mark. Keep your eyes peeled. Sharon, I will sort of pause you after every verse. You're not going to read that many verses, and give a little context as to what's going on. So go right ahead.
Moses said to Hobab, the son of Ruel the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, we are setting out for the place of which the Lord has said, I will give it to you. Come with us and we will be generous with you, for the Lord has promised to be generous to Israel.
So
there's a lot of punctuation.
There is a lot of punctuation. The weird punctuation mark is not in this sentence. It's not in the next sentence either. I'm giving you some context, but everybody's got their eagle eyes peeled. There is something a little strange about this sentence in particular, which highlights an overarching question that a lot of people have about Torah. So if you were to ask me, what's Moses' father-in-law's name? I would say that Moses' father-in-law's name is Yitro, is Jethro. In fact, there is a Torah portion named after Moses' father-in-law, Yitro, and that's in the book of Exodus, and that's where we have the first version of the 10 Commandments. So what does it mean? Ruel, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law. There is some indication here. You know, people go by multiple names. Jacob, our patriarch, was also known as Israel. It's not completely confusing. Yet there is some description called the documentary hypothesis, which has a premise that perhaps the Torah is a work of human invention, a stitching together of stories over time. And when different people in different places, separated by different times, were telling these stories, sometimes they use different names for people, places, and things. This might explain why God has so many names in the Torah. For instance, Adonai here, spelled Yud-He Vav-He, not spelled Aleph Daled, you know, actually spelled out. And that might explain why in the book of Numbers exclusively, we hear Moses' father-in-law referred to by this name, Reuel, instead of Yitro. And we also hear Mount Sinai referred to as Mount Horeb. So that's just like something interesting that's going on here. It might be nothing, you know, Moses' father-in-law might go by multiple names, but it might be an indication that these stories were told in different places over different times. Okay, so Moses says to his brother-in-law, come with us, God will be generous to you. What does Moses' brother-in-law say back, Sharon?
I will not go, he replied to him, but will return to my native land.
Thanks, but no thanks. What does Moses say back?
He said, please do not leave us, inasmuch as you know where we should camp in the wilderness and can be our guide.
Very helpful, right? Have a native guide who can show us where on earth we're going.
So if you come with us, we will extend to you the same bounty that the Lord grants us.
How very nice. If you come with us, even though you're not Jewish, you're a Midianite, you get the same prize at the end of the journey.
They marched from the mountain of the Lord a distance of 3 days. The Ark of the Covenant of the Lord traveled in front of them on that 3 days journey to seek out a resting place for them.
All right, so we have a sense of kind of a parade, a march going on. And what goes in front is the Aron, the Ark of the Covenant. This is the Ark that holds the luchot, the tablets of the commandments.
And the Lord's cloud kept above them day by day as they moved on from camp.
Okay. Saul, can I pick on you to read this one in the Hebrew, because the Hebrew is going to sound very familiar to people from the Shabbat morning liturgy.
Vayehi bin Soa Aharon Vayome Moshe Kuma Adonai Vayafutsu Oyevecha Vayanusu Misan Echa Mipanecha.
Excellent. And Sharon, what's the translation of that?
When the ark was to set out, Moses would say, "Advance, O Lord. May your enemies be scattered and may your foes flee before you."
And Saul's kind of like bobbing his head to the music that he can hear himself. Vayehi binso Aharon, vayomer Moshe, kuma Adonai. This is what we say when we're literally opening up our Aron at CBST and bringing out the Torah scroll before we do the hakafot, before the Torah scroll makes its circuits around the sanctuary. So that's where that piece of liturgy comes from. And Sharon, what is the last line of this chapter?
And when it halted, he would say, "Return, O Lord, you who are Israel's myriads of thousands."
Excellent. And so the line that follows in the liturgy, Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah, is from a different place. This is basically what Moses would say when the ark set out, and this is what Moses would say when it stopped. And who has guesses about the punctuation mark of which, Saul's got it. What is it?
So, sorry, at the beginning, if you look at the beginning of verse 35, it looks like a backwards nun.
Nailed it. Everybody see what Saul's talking about? And where else does it appear?
At the end of verse 36 is it's still the same backwards nun.
Indeed. So everything else that you see, and I'm going to show you this part of the Torah scroll to keep me honest, everything else that you see that is a punctuation mark, whether it is the vowels that come above or below or inside the letters, whether it is a trope mark that come below or occasionally above the letters, whether it is a couple of punctuation marks that help with the reading of the text. For instance, this meteg, this straight line right here, which is supposed to get the reader to pause and slow down. Whether it is the sof pasuk, the colon that Sharon pointed out earlier, or whether it is this sort of pay in the brackets, which Sefaria gives you to let you know that you've come to the end of a section. None of those are in the Torah scroll. The only things that are in the Torah scroll, so keep your eye out when I share the image, are of course the letters of the Hebrew words. However, also these inverted nuns. Let me find you a nun as it regularly occurs in the Hebrew alphabet. And so you can see that it's flipped, it's inverse. Let me show you what that looks like in CBST's Torah scroll. Can everybody see nice and big? So here we are, Vayehi binso Ha'aron, vayomer Moshe, and here is the opening inverted nun, and here is that closing inverted nun. And even if you are not a Hebrew reader, and perhaps even if this is your first time looking so closely at a Torah scroll, that looks a little strange, right? I can tell you, and our other Hebrew readers can tell you, that there isn't a Hebrew word that has only one letter in it. And so to see this one letter sitting off by itself, and for our Hebrew readers to say, that doesn't look like any Hebrew letter I know, this is weird. Margot, what do you think? Here, wait a second, Margot. I'm asking you to unmute. I think everybody has control over their mics, but just in case.
Yes, sorry. Thank you. I don't know whether this is the place, and I'm wondering whether I'm remembering correctly. But is this to indicate that what's in between the two inverted nuns was supposed to be a parsha all to itself?
That is one reading of it. We're going to talk about it.
Okay.
And this is the place, Margot. You're exactly right. But what's really extraordinary is that this is the only place this happens in the entire Torah. There is no other usage of this particular punctuation mark. I'm going to call it a punctuation mark because it's not a letter. You're not meant to read it. It's supposed to indicate something visually, and it's supposed to affect your reading of the text. but it doesn't change the pronunciation. It's not a word by itself. That's why I'm naming it as a punctuation mark. If you're being really specific about this, it is a glyph. It is a single letter symbol that is meant to indicate something typographically. And in Hebrew, the rabbis refer to this as a siman, as a symbol. That something important is at work here, but what it is, we are not entirely sure. So you can go through the entire Torah scroll. You will find a couple other simanim, and I love like jumping into each time that one of these simanim occur. There's a 3 dots that many scribes will put on top of the word in the story of Jacob and Esau's reunion, that Esau falls on his brother and kisses him. And this is absolutely not what we expect to happen after the bitter, we'll call it sibling rivalry, but like you could call it a lot of other things that Jacob and Esau go through. There's 3 dots on that word, and like, what is that supposed to mean? That's a totally different siman. This is the only time you will ever see this siman in the entire Torah scroll. You do see it one other place, which I'm happy, I will show you a little bit later. For my Psalm students, you see it in Psalm 107. You see it, there are, we'll count them up. I think that there are 7 times that it occurs in Psalm 107, and those are the only 2 places in the entire Jewish canon of text that you ever see this symbol. But because one of those places is in our Torah scroll, and because we scroll past it every single year when we read Parshat Beha'Alotcha, it's worthy of discussion, I thought. So what is this symbol and what is it meant to mean? Margot has an absolutely accurate remembrance that maybe it's supposed to indicate an entirely separate Parsha. Oh, I'm also like now just catching up on the chat. God does have, Margot, were you saying that God has 7 names, or Yitro, Moses's father-in-law, might have like 7 names?
Yitro, but I don't know how many names. I'm just thinking it's more than 3, and it was, I thought like 7, but I'm not sure.
It is, and you know, it could be, the more names, the more one might be convinced that maybe different people were telling the story and the character was named different things and it was all sort of like put together. But we go by lots of names in our life. So I'm thinking about that Zelda poem. Each of us has a name given to us by our stature and our smile. You know, we could have millions of names. So I don't necessarily want to discount that entirely. Ruth, did I answer your question? The straight line, I'm assuming you mean the meteg, the pause that you're supposed to take? Yes, great. So when you have all of the punctuation marks at your disposal, the meteg is another important punctuation mark that, here, let me show everybody what Ruth and I are talking about. This is the meteg. And it comes up in other places too. It's not a terribly uncommon punctuation mark. And it's meant to give you like a solid pause between words. And often it's used if a word is repeated. Like in the 13 attributes, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum V'Chanun. Between Adonai and Adonai, there's a meteg, because you shouldn't just like smush that together when you're reciting it. You shouldn't just be like Adonai, Adonai, you need to pronounce it. And so with this important section, one must pronounce each of these words. Jumping back to the chat, Siman Ari with a samech, not a sin. And Sharon is wondering, you know, you've got like perfect brackets here, and you don't, it's very interesting, and we are going to talk about it, that when you look at the way it is rendered in Sefaria, it's not brackets, right? These are both just backwards nuns. It's not that one is facing in and one is facing out, or vice versa. Perhaps I put that backwards. Honestly, Sharon, what this usually has to do with, and this has been the case ever since we have been printing Torahs for use in commentaries, for study, it is cheaper to make only one weird character because you're only going to use it twice if you're printing a version of the 5 books of Moses, the Chumash, and you're only going to use it 9 times in total if you're printing the entire Tanakh. Why would you waste the making of like another, whether it is in Unicode, which is like how you make a new character when you're typing, or whether you're thinking about a printing press and you actually have to make the stencil to create that mark? It's easier to just make one version of it. So that's why a lot of people just used their nuns and like flipped it upside down. In handwriting, it shows up a bunch of different ways, and I'm going to show you how it looks in several different codices. And I think I have answered everybody except for those who are dedicating their study in honor of fabulous people whom they remember. So we've spent a lot of time talking about what the symbol looks like. What on earth does it mean? The very first time that we see reference to something that may be this symbol, and I hate to break it to you, it does not say, you know, those inverted nunim that happen in Parshat Beha'Alotcha. There is no reference to that. It is rather a Mishnaic era treatise. It is a book that was written around the time of the Mishnah, 200 of the Common Era, called Mishnah Yadayim, which has to do with the sacredness of books. And it says, if there is a sacred book that has 85 letters undisturbed, it will, such as the passage by Vayhi Binsoa Aharon, which is our passage bracketed by those nunim, that happens to be 85 letters. If it is 85 letters, like that passage, it renders the hands impure, which means that it is a holy text. And that's all it says. So what do we have that actually talks about that passage and those inverted nunim? I am in Tractate Shabbat of the Babylonian Talmud. And this is talking about the obligation that we as Jewish people have towards the preservation of sacred text. We know that, Torah scrolls and books and anything that a sofer writes, whether it goes in a mezuzah or the boxes of our tefillin, those are human-made creations, and eventually they degrade, they break down, and they are no longer usable. Or sometimes, terrible things happen to them. They come to accidents, they get wet, they get burned, they get smoke damage, they're damaged by the oils of our hands. And the question is that certainly, if the Torah touches the ground, if somebody touches one of the letters of the Torah, it's no longer a kosher Torah. We can't use it for Torah reading. And what do we do with it? Anybody know? What happens? Yes, exactly, Ari. You bury it. You treat it like a Jewish person, and it gets its own burial plot. That is the end of its lifespan. And this is, it's not great. And if you drop a Torah, we have to fast for 40 days as a community, as showing the major extent of our mourning. But it's not a thing that's never happened. So there are rules about what to do when it inevitably happens every once in a while. This is sort of the inverse. That's what happens when something is taken from holy status and becomes unholy, as it were, not fit for holy use anymore. However, what is the level at which something is still considered holy enough for you to rescue it from a fire, for instance? If a Torah scroll is burning, what level of completion do you say there's still something worth saving here, and I'm going to pull it out of the fire, even if I might be in physical danger pulling it out of the fire, even if it's Shabbat and I shouldn't be messing with fires anyway? So this is the question that the sages are debating in this particular part of the Talmud. What are the parameters of this is still considered a sacred artifact and we have to do everything within our power to protect it, or it was a sacred artifact, but it is beyond saving because it has been so thoroughly damaged. So an English reader, please, for this section of the Talmud. Go for it, Stacy.
A dilemma?
Yeah, there you go. A dilemma.
A dilemma was raised before the sages with regard to these 85 letters that allow one to rescue a Torah scroll. Is that specifically when they are juxtaposed or even when they are scattered?
Okay, pause just for a second, Stacy. So we have that rule from Mishnah Yadayim that gives us the number 85. So there have to be 85 letters undamaged that would allow you to rescue a Torah scroll, even if it's mostly destroyed. That means it's not completely destroyed. There's still something worth saving. And then the question that's being asked, and just a quick note for people who this is one of their earlier times reading Talmud, on Sefaria, if the words are bolded, that means they're actually in the Hebrew. The Hebrew is a notoriously compact language, and so it requires a lot of like mortar between the bricks to be able to make it a sentence that makes sense. So if it's bolded, that's actually in the Hebrew. If it's not bolded, that's our filling in the blanks. Sometimes those blanks can be filled in slightly differently, but they're usually pretty consistent. Okay, so 85 letters. Do they need to be 85 letters next to each other? That is to say that they are like words or a sentence or a fragment of a sentence, or must they be juxtaposed? Or is it 85 letters anywhere in the scroll, scattered all over the place? If you believe there are 85 letters individually that are not damaged, is it worth saving that Torah scroll? So go ahead, Stacy. What does Rav Huna think?
Okay. Rav Huna said, only when they are juxtaposed.
Okay, so Rav Huna says only if they're in sentences. You can't possibly know if there are 85 letters somewhere over the course of the Torah that aren't damaged. Go ahead.
Rav Hizda said, even when they are scattered.
So we have a disagreement. Rav Hizda says if there are 85 letters somewhere in there, then it still fits the parameters. You got to rescue it. Keep going, Stacy.
The Gemara raises an objection from that which we learned with regard to a Torah scroll that is worn. If there is enough to compile from it 85 complete letters, as in the portion of when the ark traveled, one rescues it from the fire, and if not, one does not rescue it. The term to compile indicates that the letters are not juxtaposed, and this is a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rav Huna.
Okay, pause just for a second. So the Gemara, the Talmud, is directly referring to that piece of knowledge that 85 complete letters, like Vayhi Binsoa Aharon, that section is 85 letters. So that's they're sort of like going backwards, saying, why are we so focused on 85? And the rule is that if there is enough to compile from it, 85 letters, therefore using the term, oops, I don't want that. Using the term compile indicates that you're putting the letters together, which indicates that they don't need to be right next to each other. Everybody kind of following the logic there. If you had to compile them, it sounds like they're scattered already. So that is a refutation. That means that in the argument of Rav Huna versus Rav Hizda, that means that Rav Huna is wrong. So keep going, Stacy. Rav Hizda interpreted it.
Rav Hizda interpreted it according to the opinion of Rav Huna. Indeed, the Barita is referred to a case where the letters are scattered, but they are juxtaposed in the form of words. In that case, even Rav Huna agrees that it is a sacred book. Excuse me, folks. Rav Huna and Rav Hizda only disagree in a case where isolated letters are scattered.
So basically what that's saying is that if the letters are juxtaposed, if you can actually pull out like real words and sentences, nobody's questioning if you should save that scroll. If there are 85 of them and they're in like readable form, then definitely save the scroll. 100% agreement. However, when the isolated letters are scattered, know that there's a majority and a minority opinion. The Talmud has ruled in favor of the majority opinion, that which isolated letters still count, but maybe there will come a day when that opinion needs to be reversed. And so the Talmud is recording it for posterity.
Rabbi, may I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Okay. Maybe I'm not even going to say that. What I'm thinking of is that, so basically a Torah can be saved from salvage of a fire.
Mm-hmm.
If there's 85 words that are cohesive.
A Torah should be saved from a fire, even at great cost. You know, the cost of breaking Shabbat, or maybe even hurting yourself or putting your life in danger, if there are 85 letters, and definitely if there are 85 letters that are put into words.
Well, how would anybody know that if they're taking it out of a fire?
That's something that the Talmud doesn't get into as much, but the premise
Okay.
is sort of, and Stacy, it's a very fair question. The premise is sort of like, if you can see the Torah scroll like unfurled, and it's not all rolled up, but like you could actually see it, and you can see that there's a solid chunk that's undamaged, longer than, you know, in your head, Vayhi b'nso Aharon, Vayomer Moshe. Yeah, that looks longer than that. Okay, let's go get it. And just to clarify, this is not saying that like, oh, if there's 85 undamaged letters, the Torah is still good to read. No, it's a question of, should the Torah be taken out and put into a geniza or buried, or like, is parchment salvageable? It's not a question of like, do we put this Torah back in the ark? The Torah is unquestionably damaged. It's just, do we owe it as a sacred artifact, like a level of protection and respect, even when it is deeply, deeply damaged? Or do we say, I don't even see 85 letters, that's basically cinders? Making
Thank
sense?
you.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Rabbi, it's Margot here. Question, and I don't know whether you're going to get to it later on, so were you to, you just tell me, hold off. But is the saving of, if there's 85, is that at all analogous to the respect we give to human life?
Ooh, Margot, I was not going to get into that. I
Okay,
think that's
fine.
a fascinating question.
I don't know. I'm not being rhetorical. I'm just really curious. But
yeah, I
maybe
don't,
for another time.
Yeah, I don't honestly know. I got to think about it. It seems that the number 85 was derived from, we need, you know, what is too much and what is too little. We've got to make a metric somewhere above, more, greater than or less than. And it appears that that section, it's not that like we came up with 85 and we were looking for something that fit 85. It's rather that we have that section by Vayhi b'nso Aharon, that's 85 letters, and therefore it has to be at least that long. Make sense? So which came first, the chicken or the egg? Vayhi b'nso Aharon came first, and from there we got 85, not the other way around. All right, now we're actually going to talk about those nuns. It's been a while, but we're coming back to it. Can I have an English reader apropos the portion by Vayhi b'nso Aharon? Go ahead, Ari, please.
Apropos the portion, and when the ark traveled, the Gemara cites that which the sages taught in a Baraita. It is stated, and when the ark traveled, and Moses proclaimed, "Rise up, God, and your enemies will scatter, and those who hate you will flee from before you." And the Holy One, blessed be he, made signs in the Torah for this portion, above and below, i.e. before and after it, in order to say,
this is just like a page break in the Talmud. What did they say, Ari?
But this is not its place, as the previous portion does not discuss the nation's travels. Whoa. Rav Yehuda Hanasi says it is not for that reason that signs were inserted. Rather, the signs are there because this portion is considered a book unto itself.
All right, so there is even more to be discussed here, but let's go back for a second. So you can follow along in the Hebrew. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, and so it doesn't literally say this, but since we're on the subject of Vayehi binsoa ha'aron vayomer Moshe, it is stated when the ark traveled and Moses said, Kuma Adonai. So you don't even see that in the Hebrew, right? The only citation from Torah that you see is what's in these quotation marks, which is literally and when the ark traveled. Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be, put signs, and this is where we get the term siman to describe those inverted nuns for this portion above and below it. If we're interpreting it, we mean more like before and after it. It's not like there's something above the portion and then below the portion, it's bracketing it, in order to say that this is not in its place because it seems really out of context. Remember what Sharon was reading in the Torah portion. We were talking about a conversation between Moses and his brother-in-law, and then we set out on our journey 3 days from Mount Sinai. And then all of a sudden we get the section about the ark traveled. And then like the chapter ends, we're on to something completely different. That seems weird. Maybe this is not in its place. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who is the grand compiler, that's why he gets to be the prince. He is of greater stature. He is the compiler of the Mishnah. He says, no, it's not because it's not in that place. It's not that it shouldn't be in that place. It's because this portion is a book all by itself. So Ari, can I ask you to keep going, to unpack that a little bit? What does it mean? This is a book all by itself?
Yes. The Gemara asks, according to whose opinion is that which Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman said, that Rabbi Yonatan said, that with regard to the verse, with wisdom she built her house, she carved its 7 pillars. These are the 7 books of the Torah.
Okay, pause for just a second. The syntax is really messy, so we're going to unpack it just a teeny bit. So what the Gemara is like, wait, whose opinion is that this is a book by itself? What is, they need Judah Hanasi to establish like a mathematical proof from whence he gets this crazy idea. And the derivation of that idea is that Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman said, that Rabbi Yonatan said, that if you read this verse from Proverbs, in the book of Proverbs, Mishle, it says, with wisdom she built her house, she carved its 7 pillars. Basically, whenever you read wisdom, especially in the book of Proverbs, they're talking about Torah. Torah is feminized in Jewish canonical text. So it means Torah built her house and Torah carved 7 pillars. Why would it be 7 pillars? Why, Ari?
These are according to whose opinion? It is according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, as by his count there are 7 books of the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, until and when the ark traveled, the portion and when the ark traveled, which is considered its own book, the remainder of Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Okay,
so let's count this out. Everybody knows we call it the Chumash because there are 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. 5. However, if you say that this section bracketed by those nuns is its own book, what would that make the total number of the books of the Torah? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers until Vayehi binsoa ha'aron, Vayehi binsoa aharon, Numbers after Vayehi binsoa ha'aron, and Deuteronomy. That's how you get 7. That's why now all of a sudden this Proverbs verse makes sense. Why are there 7 pillars of the house that Torah carved? All along there were 7 books of the Torah. This is what Yehuda Hanasi thinks. He's not the only person who had an opinion, remember. Somebody else said that, generally the opinion, Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught us, those signs were meant to say that it's not in its place. However, this is a very exciting and esoteric and mystical opinion. Maybe there were 7 books of the Torah all along. And this is the last section that we're going to read. Can someone give Ari a break? One more English reader for this section of the Talmud. Go for it, Margot.
Who is the Tana who disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi?
Okay, so who dares disagree with the great Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi? Which of our Tanaim, which of our great sages? Keep going.
It is Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel.
Ooh. Basically like the only one with the stature to be able to fight with Yehuda Hanasi.
As it was taught in Baraita that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, in the future, this portion will be uprooted from here, where it appears, and will be written in its proper place. And why was it written here? Even though it discusses the travels of the children of Israel and the portion before it does not, it is in order to demarcate between the first punishment and the second punishment. What is the second punishment that appears immediately afterward? It is the verse, and the people complained wickedly in God's ears, and God heard and became angry, and the fire of God burned in them, and it consumed the edge of the camp. What is the first punishment? It is the verse, and they traveled from the mountain of God, Mahar Hashem, for 3 days. And Rabbi Hama, son of Rabbi Hanina, said that they turned from after God, Meharei Hashem, and hurriedly fled Mount Sinai. The Gemara asks, and if so, where is the proper place for this paragraph? Rav Ashi said, in the portion of the flags, where there is a description of the manner in which the Jewish people traveled through the desert.
Thank you, Margot. So we have so far 3 hypotheses as to why those nuns are where they are. Why do we have those simanim? The first hypothesis is that this was meant to go, well, basically we have 2 hypotheses. The first hypothesis is that this is not in the right place. It's supposed to go in a different place. The second hypothesis is that, no, this is in the exact right place. This is its own separate book. However, there is credence to the first hypothesis that in the future, when Messiah comes, this portion will magically lift itself from every Torah scroll, and it will fly its way back to where it is supposed to be. I'm skipping ahead a little bit. Where is it supposed to be? It's in the portion of the degalim, of the flags. That's Numbers 2. It's fairly early in the text. I'm happy to show it to you if we have time, but it's basically like all of the children of Israel are amassing themselves, and they're laying themselves out as one grand army, basically, to march together. And so here's the flag of this tribe, and here's the flag of this tribe. And it would make a lot more sense there, because then the ark goes forward and everybody follows the ark. And so contextually, that makes a lot more sense. But if it's meant to be there, why is it here at all? And so Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, it's here until the Messiah comes and it flies to its proper place, because it needs to separate out the first punishment that we read of in this part of Numbers and the second punishment that we read of in the book, in the Parshat Beha'Alotcha. You don't want the children of Israel to look so bad that they did 2 terrible things, one right after the other. You needed a little space between the 2 terrible things before God punishes them. Jumping back to our actual Torah portion text. Where did I put it in all of the, oh, there it is. sorry, friends. Here, I'm just gonna add it over here. There we go. All right. Give me a chance to scroll all the way down to verse 29. That's where we started, talking to Reuel's son, Hobab. And then here's the line that says, they marched from the mountain of Adonai for 3 days, and the ark traveled in front of them. And so what Rabbi Gamliel is saying is that this right here, they shouldn't have done that. They were in the presence of God. Why did they all of a sudden turn around and basically run for 3 days? They should have waited in the presence of God. Like, why were they in such a rush to leave God's presence, especially when they were having important conversations? That was the first thing that was a punishable offense. And then we've got the section about the ark went forward, separating out from chapter 11 when we get more complaining, and a fire is sent by God to ravage the outskirts of the camp, and Moses has to pray and talk God down from God's very, very angry place. Moses is a great God anger management coach. Okay, so all of these things being said, what do you think is the reason that we have these inverted nuns surrounding this paragraph? Which of the hypotheses makes the most sense to you? Which one at least is like too bizarre to even be considered? Why do you think we needed that particular siman to only show up in this place of the entire Torah?
Rabbi, can you quickly review what the 3 options were
Sure,
once
absolutely.
again?
Okay, and to help us out, why don't we look at the text sort of in situ for all of our visual learners for whom that might assist them. Okay, so here's the 2 nuns and the sentences that they describe. Option 1 is this doesn't make a whole lot of sense where it is. And so you've got these nuns to say that this is not where it should be. And either it's just a scribal error, but we've been doing it for so long since the Masoretes that we're not going to mess with it now. We're just going to put like a little neon sign that says this is probably not where it's supposed to be. Or if you would like to read into the deeply mystical reasons behind it, you can quote Rabbi Gamliel and say it's only here for right now. When the Messiah comes, it will go back to its proper place, which is in Numbers 2, where we're talking about flags and standards and marching orders, and that would make a lot more sense. Or you could agree with Yehuda Hanassi, who says that this is a book all by itself. What do people think?
And why all by itself again?
Because we have a sentence in, and Joel, I saw your hand and would love to hear what you think as soon as we answer Margot's question. We have that quote from the book of Proverbs, which has never been fully explained. If Torah is carving a house for herself, why on earth would she make 7 pillars of the house instead of 5? This is a perfect explanation, and maybe the one serves the other, because all of Torah was revealed all at once, all the Torah that ever has been and all the Torah that ever will be. And so why shouldn't it be talking directly to each other? All right, Joel, what do you think?
Thank you.
Joel Moses, where'd you go?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Saul. Oh
yeah.
no, Joel's here. Hooray, good Shabbos.
Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom. This is a bit tangential, but I'm reading, this is a whole series of it's biblical criticism and open orthodoxy.
Ooh.
And they mention this one, actually. There's a lot of material in Midrash and Talmud and how basically, the Rambam makes, well, conventional orthodoxy nowadays is that God dictated every single word to Moshe.
Mm-hmm.
And the Torah, but the reality is in the Talmud and Midrash especially, you see that it's not quite like the documentary hypothesis, but
Mm-hmm.
there are elements of it. There's one opinion that Moshe, God made him the editor, and
Mm-hmm.
there were books like Bereshit and stuff like that. There were other books and Moshe edited and added it to the Torah. Like they talk about him sewing the Torah together from different sources. And there's all sorts of midrashim like that. And it's just, it's not talked about nowadays, all these midrashim. So this book, I assume it was probably, either it was from another source, like following this line of thinking, it was probably from another book. And okay, this is the redactor or whoever, whether you consider Moshe.
Yeah, the person who is stitching this together, whether it's Moses or a redactor, sure.
Yes, Rabbi redactor, as they say.
Yeah.
He or she put it together, but somehow this is a residue, whether through tradition, and then the people who wrote who created the Masoretic text were aware somehow, and they knew there was something different about it, and it is different, the context and everything. So they wanted to show it. In rabbinic literature, sometimes they use the term hamevin yavin. They don't directly. That he who understands will understand it. So it's a way of saying it's something we're not really supposed to talk about. But
excellent. So maybe, as Joel is saying, this is a quiet signaling that there's something fishy going on here. If you're of the level to be able to contend with this intellectually or spiritually, this is your bookmark of where it goes. But perhaps it's some of the careful stitching. It's the marks of where things have been sewn together. That's beautiful. I will put into the chat in a minute a lecture on this subject by the Rabbi of Chabad of Brooklyn Heights, where it's very Rabbi Moskowitz, frankly, now that I've become like attuned to his patterns of speech. It's just like an avalanche of midrashim about this particular section. And Joel, it speaks a lot to what you are describing. And one of my favorite things that I derived from that I did not know before, why are these nuns? You could have picked any character, right? Like the entire, you could have made up a character, you could have chosen any Hebrew letter. Why'd you choose nun? Nun is the 50th letter in Gematria. And so this is to say that this section should have gone 50 paragraphs earlier, which is where it would have gone if it went in Numbers 2. With the section about the flags. Okay, Saul, what do you think?
Rabbi, if I could say something after Saul regarding the nun.
Absolutely, I see your hand.
So my first instinct is to agree with Joel that this is a scribal error. Doesn't belong here, probably belongs, earlier, but the Masoretes not only decided to put in these symbols, but if you look again at the clock, there's this big space before Vayehi, and there's this big space after the word Israel. And so, no, this is not the Masoretes had decided, nope, this is too important to be just a scribal error. This section, you must pay attention to it. Now, the only thing that prevents me from saying it's a sefer by itself is the fact that no one ever stops here. If you're going to read the Aliyah that this includes, you start somewhere before and you end somewhere after. There is no, let's not make a great big deal out of this when you're reading the text. It's just part of the text and it flows. So, because if the Masoretes wanted it to be a sefer by itself, they would have done that. We would be saying Chazak, Chazak after Minha. I can't read, it's too tiny, but that's okay. Yeah. But after Minha, and we would say Chazak, Chazak after Yisrael, and that would be it. But that's truly not decided yet.
Yeah, and Saul, I think that's a fascinating perspective from the point of view of a reader. And it does seem, I think you're absolutely right, that all of the simanim here are scribal rather than kriya, rather than read. You know, we get all kinds of instructions about this is a section that you need to read balachash, that you need to whisper. And this is a section that people need to repeat after you. And this is a section where everybody needs to stand. None of that for this section, which is so clearly demarcated in the text. So maybe there are competing levels of priority here, that the scribes see this is very important, but those who are reading don't see it as particularly important. And what Saul's saying, I hope everybody kind of put that together. Look at not only these simanim of the nunim, but you know, it's not just like buried in line in one of these paragraphs. The blocks of space, and it is said that you can read just as much from the white fire, that is the parchment, as the black fire, which is the letters of the Torah. And you get these huge honking spaces before and after. It's bigger than, you know, just the sort of paragraph break that you get mid-block or at the beginning. Julie Seltzer, one of our absolute favorite Soferet, who worked with CBST, has shown me all of these scribal manuals that describe exactly how big these blocks are supposed to be. It's not an accident. They're supposed to take roughly 10 letters. And if it's going to take more than 10 letters, you should just like let the line end right there. Not every Torah scroll is almost the same. Of course, they're just a little bit different. There are some guiding principles that tell a scribe how to write a Torah scroll so that, you know, the books end in about the same place, so that the columns are about the same width and there's so many words per line without squishing or squashing. They're very, very concerned with too much squashing. You see a lot of that in scribal guidebooks. And it's very careful to say you should have only this much space between the Siman and Vayehi. You should have only this much space between Yisrael and the Siman. So every scribe is so careful about that. But Saul's right. Every reader is not particularly careful. As careful as one would be when one is reading Torah, which is a very sacred obligation, but no more so. Thank you. Okay, Margot, what do you think about the Nunim?
Yeah, and I have nothing, no take on the three explanations given why it is here. It seems like one can come up with any interpretation, and
sure could.
Tanim gave that one. But given our understanding that our holy books, particularly the Chumash or the Shiva, I suppose, if you believe in 7 books, preceded later writings in our Tanakh, like Psalms. And Psalms have certain acrostic poetry within them. And within those, I don't know how many, whether there's one or others, where the noon is dropped out because noon suggests falling. Yeah. And I'm wondering whether there's any idea that this inverted noon suggesting something fallen was then used as not making a verse in certain acrostic psalm.
Definitely, when I've been reading commentaries on this, and the one that I will share with the like avalanche of midrashim that is mentioned, also Nun's connection to the word nes, a miracle, and the fact that the word nes, this tiny Hebrew word, has the letter nun, which could symbolize nafal, and then samech, which could symbolize somech, to be supported. So you have kind of the entire narrative of teshuva there in that one tiny word. Maybe that's why they chose nun for this particular bracketing.
And
There are a
samech
lot.
would be like a pillar, I suppose.
Yeah, it does look very pillar-like. Margot, you have been such a perfect plant for me to show everybody a couple of different visual things I wanted to make sure that we touched upon just in terms of context. Maybe they help you make up your mind, maybe they don't. But so this is the Psalm. This is Psalm 107 for which is the only other occasion that we see those inverted nunim within any piece of Jewish sacred text. And you get it more than once. Look at all that. And then not again. Till here. And this is the only psalm in the book of Psalms that discusses this. We perhaps for our summer Psalms session, we can do 107 in particular and talk about some of the midrashic possibilities that are within this psalm if you've got these nunim in there. And then I also wanted to show you this. This is basically like Reddit for biblical scholars, and it's something that I love looking at. But what I wanted to show everybody here were a couple of different manuscripts of the way that Torah is written and how, so yes, if you're just typing this out and you only want to make one character, or you're printing it out, whether on a literal printing press or a more modernized version, and you only want to have one character, but if you're handwriting, it's basically like your signature. It's a way that you can tell the hand of one scribe from another. So here's how the Leningrad Codex renders those same bracketed nunim. Here's one that uses it as a nun sofit instead of just a regular nun, a final nun. We also have, let me see if I can do a whiteboard here. That would be super exciting. Oh, Sharon Golub, our genius educator. How do I pull a whiteboard up on?
Is it in your view on top? See, I'm not seeing what you're seeing, but there's annotate. Like when you share your screen, there should be one of the boxes should say whiteboard.
All right.
Instead of your desktop.
Oh, okay. When I'm actually in share screen function, what would we do without Sharon Golub, friends? I actually don't have that.
You don't have that?
No.
Annotate is disabled.
Oh, thanks, Jason. That would explain it.
In case of anyone trying to write on the screen during a service.
Appreciate it. I don't mind that at all. So basically, there are several different ways that one could literally write out the nun. You could have it as brackets. You could have it as we saw in Sefaria, both nuns sort of like, well, they're usually backwards, so you know that they're not actually meant to be nuns facing the same way. Or a lot of people do them in Sephardic texts as Z's, that the stem of the nun, the pillar of the nun, as Margot described it, is crossed, so that you know it's not actually meant to be a Hebrew letter, but rather a sign. I will say that I think that there is a lot of proof leading us towards this being a scribal notation. In ancient Greek texts, there's a function that's called a sigma and an anti-sigma, which writers would use to say that we're not sure that this is in the right place. And when you think about the derivation of the Torah text as we have it, its very first translation being the Septuagint, in a time and place when that kind of typography was common, the sigma and the anti-sigma, that's when we start really worrying ever so much more so about having all of our versions of Torah match in their translation, in their proliferation across the entire diasporic community. So the academic in me thinks that that would make a lot of sense in historical context, that it was common for writers of text to ensure that they've basically like cited their sources. We're not really sure if these letters are meant to be, if what happens between these symbols is meant to be in the right place or not. But I have a more mystical interpretation that I will share with you after Stacy gets a turn. Go ahead, Stacy.
Okay, let me lower my hand because that would be, oh, I love it when I know how to lower my hand.
I'm so proud of you.
Very technical. First, I want to thank you for all this information. I mean, it's really put together very well. Thank you. Second, I think I'm losing my train of thought with all of this. I hope that doesn't come off. Well, I'm not going to worry how it comes off because I know you'll tell me. How's that? That's my new setting. But is it my understanding, because I'm listening to Saul and Margot and others within the chat, that is it part of it? Is it just a scribal thing, or is it that there's something missing, or is it that it's missing, and so is that what you mean by a book, that there's that space that that we don't know what it is, so therefore they're just, or is it, I'm just getting a little.
Sure. So the choices are that, as Saul describes as most likely, and I see a lot of people agreeing with Saul in the chat. By a lot, I mean two, but in terms of like the percentage of our 26 participants this morning, that's quite a lot. That this is meant to be in another place. It's not to say that something is missing, it's to say that something is extra. That the story should have sort of continued without that insertion, or that there's an entire extra book available to us. And this is kind of what I would like to close with, a mini drash on what it might mean if this was our extra book. There is much to be said when you actually look at the words making up that very tiny book of, it's mostly focusing on enemies. Let me bring back to you the text itself so that we can follow along and look closely. Here we go. So this is, if we were taking it literally, we're talking about God as the head of a grand army that follows. The ark is at the front, it is the standard bearer. And Moses would say, advance, Adonai, may your enemies be scattered, may your foes flee before you. And then when we stop, return, O Adonai, you who are Israel's myriad of thousands. And this is sort of representative that God is the one in front, sort of as an independent actor, and yet God is also representative of all of Israel, of the many, many myriad and varied versions of who makes up Israel. While Saul is absolutely correct that when reading this, this Torah portion, Beha'Alotcha, we don't make any special reading priorities about separating out or reading this section any differently. I do think that it is significant. Lots and lots of pieces of Torah make their way into our liturgy on Shabbat evening, on Shabbat morning, on the holidays, and all of these different opportunities. Torah is one of our very favorite places from which to draw poetry for our liturgy. But what is the sentence that calls us all to attention and that says now is the time for us to open up the closet and to bring Torah out into our midst. It's this one. And we have built a section of the service that we embody where the Torah is our standard and we march behind it, and Torah pauses, it halts for every person who wants to give it honor, who wants to touch it or to kiss it or to connect with it. And so I think that while this can sort of be seen as a set of verses that isn't exactly fitting where it's supposed to fit, I think a lot about the Psalms verse from 118, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This verse that seems out of place where it is the one that we use as representation for when we're coming into relationship and when we're coming into vulnerability and learning and when we're coming into leadership, when Torah is in our midst. So maybe in the context of Torah, it doesn't fit perfectly, but in the context of our communal experience and the way that we recite it each time, it has magnified importance. And so I very much look forward to the day when we are all gathered in our sanctuary once again, when we lift the parochet, the beautiful tapestry that protects our Aron, when we open up the doors of the ark that say Tov Lehodot Ladonai on them, and when we bring the Torah scroll out into our midst for the grand Pride March that will be Torah services in person. I hope that all of us recognize this verse with a lot of love, with a little bit of strangeness, and that we can sort of see ourselves reflected in it. Ken Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will for us. My friends, it has been an absolute delight to share the study of Torah with you this morning, and to get the opportunity to go so deep into one punctuation mark. What a luxury. And this is what Shabbat is supposed to feel like for us. You know, the luxury of time to spend with people we love and to immerse ourselves in sacred texts in a way that we don't have time for when we're occupied with other things. And so as promised, because we are in community together today for Shabbat morning, we wanted to offer an opportunity for anyone who wishes to say Kaddish to be able to do so. We will recite Kaddish all together, and if it is your custom, I invite you to join us, to stand if it is your custom to stand, having experienced loss, to be seated if that is your custom. And on this particular Shabbat morning, we mourn with the family and the friends of the LGBTQ activist and photographer Kayla Hewson, Zichrona Livracha, who died on Wednesday of the past week. We surround with love our CBS team members, Adria Benjamin and her partner, Lori Rhodes. I see Adria in the Zoom room today, and we're sending you all of our love and our blessings as you pass through the immediate loss of your dear mother, Thelma Benjamin, Zichrona Livracha, who died on May 21st at the age of 97, and CBS team member Mitchell Bloom on the death of his stepmother, Peggy Miller Bloom, Zichrona Livracha, who died on May 25th at age 92. We honor the yahrzeits of our CBS team members and our family and friends. I invite anyone who is remembering somebody who has passed in recent days, or if it is the season of their passing, to share their names in the chat as I read these beloved names out loud. Robert Cooper, Libby Ginden, Jacob Gubai, Robert Levine, Mark Lutvak, Gilda Pavlov, Lutz Wrench, Milt Tadelman, Maury Fleischer, Norman Friedman, Sylvia D. Gewurtz, Pearl Goldstein, Gussie Gordon, Bernard Gould, Melvin Gross, Brenda Howard, Nat Jefferson, Ron Neuwirth, Gary Philip Ryan, Shirley Schreck, Jeremiah Tax, Esther Weinberg, Jeffrey Weiss. And for all of those who are dying each day from the COVID-19 pandemic, at the beginning of Shabbat, the total number of deaths were 33,184 in New York City, 53,529 in New York State, 607,780 across the United States, and 3,531,425 worldwide. We're going to share the words of the Kaddish on the screen so that everybody can follow along with the tradition of their choosing. And I invite you to rise in body and spirit, if it is your custom. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach hiruteh ve'amlich malchuteh, b'chayechon u'vyomechon u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach leolam u'almei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudsha brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemarta, de'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imeru amen. So it is terrifically early for us to start a Kiddush lunch. We haven't quite reached 11 o'clock yet, but I do want an opportunity for us to recite Kiddush and Motzi so that when you are ready for your Oneg Shabbos, for your enjoyment of Shabbos, you are well blessed. So if you are holding, let me get my Kiddush cup. If you have something to bless with for Kiddush, I invite you to bring it up. And if you've got challah, now's the time as well. Make sure it's in reach. We'll start with for Kiddush V'Shamru, honoring that this is Shabbat and it is a great brit. It is a symbol, not quite a siman, for the Jewish people and for our God of our relationships and our gift throughout time. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Beini uvein b'nei Yisrael, oti leolam, oti leolam. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Uvayom hashvi'i shavat vayinafash, shavat vayinafash, shavat vayinafash, v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Savri chavarai v'chavarotai, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. And we will also bless with motzi. Anybody holding something bready and delicious for us to reach towards? Ooh, Stacy's got an entire loaf. That's excellent. Worst comes to worst, ein kemach, ein Torah. We liken the Torah to wheat and sustenance all the time, and we have had much Torah sustenance today. So let's reach out our hands towards one another. So we are all connected in blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. B'te'avon, Ari, with your gorgeous loaf of challah. It's a very impressive braid. Oh, and Peter as well. Peter was hiding on my other Zoom screen, but that is a glorious looking challah too. Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Just a clarification. I know that on the calendar, there are 2 Havdalah services. One is because if you or anyone you know wanted to hear more about our Limud B'Shabbat program, our teaching program for children and the people who love them at CBST, or our teen track, which this year is going to take a civil rights journey to the South. We're doing information sessions tonight that are bracketed by Havdalah. So we've got a special Havdalah service for anyone who wishes to learn more about those 2 particular programs. And if you have questions, you can definitely ask Sharon Golub, who's a beloved teacher in our program. And then, as per usual, tonight at 8 o'clock, we will start our schmooze and our learning and our community time for Havdalah. And at 8:45, we'll start the actual Havdalah service itself, and everybody's welcome, and the link is on the website. So Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We're going to keep the room open for 6 more minutes just to say hi. Anybody have any thunderbolt realizations about the Simanim?
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Good
Shabbat
job.
shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everyone.
I'm afraid we are now out of insights about the Simanim.
Yeah, there are Simanim everywhere, Darina. So there's a lot of exciting stuff to learn. I find the writing of Torah scrolls so fascinating. It's art.
Absolutely.
And it's also artifact. It's a very sacred straddling of the ways that we honor holy moments.
I have a suggestion.
Yes, tell me, Carol.
I put it in the chat, but I'll say it again, that maybe a program at CBST about what you're saying now, but also about various sources of research for the holy
Ooh.
text. Now, I know about Safaria, but that's sort of the height of my limit. And I know there's tons of of stuff out there.
Yeah. And Carol, to say that like Safaria is my limit, that's a really high bar. That
know.
is an extremely comprehensive source. But you're right. Yeah, I would love to. And also, lots of people know about Safaria, but lots of people don't know about its functionality and like how you could dive from the 101 into like the 401, the 501. I'd be delighted to do that. That's a great idea. Yes, Sharon.
I would love a class in more like what you did today, like the oddities of
Yes,
things.
we love the oddities, right?
I don't know if that's the right word, but
no, I think that's
I found
perfect.
this so fascinating. I could definitely do an 8-week class, listen to, 8
the weird
weeks
and wonderful in
yes,
the Torah.
I say go for it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll be there.
And since we've got so many cool and unbelievable Sofrim and Sofrot who are connected to CBST, the people who literally write the Torah scrolls, like Julie Seltzer, like Rabbi Linda Motzkin, like Shana Call, who's a member of CBST and who's part of a scribe collective. We've got a deep bank of knowledge. It's very cool. I had so much fun on Simchat Torah when we were learning from Rabbi Motzkin about how to literally make the Torahs. That was like a highlight of my year.
There's someone who used to go to CBST, like he's a friend of mine. His lockdown project was studying Masorah full time.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
You know, I am one of those people who people say like, what'd you do in this moment of lockdown? What extra thing did you do? And it's like nothing. I just tried to survive it. But I am in awe and have a very deep respect for everybody who like used this opportunity to learn something new, to pick up a new skill. Maybe by the end of this, I will finally be able to share a whiteboard on the screen on Zoom. That would be my.
I found this by the end. It took me till the end of it to kind of understand where it was going, because sometimes I feel a little like intimidated by all this. It feels like, but it was very. It's very. It took away the intimidation.
I'm so glad. And so we, you know, with the fifth Shabbatot, we're kind of going back and forth, as I described, very, you know, accessible and yet high level Torah study, hyper focused, going really deep into the text, and, you know, like leveling the playing field, very accessible, but also very deep, learners' introduction to the service, so that everybody understands the pieces that go into a Shabbat morning service together a little bit more deeply. So we've got, I can tell you the next month that has a fifth Shabbat in it is July. And so that fifth Shabbat, we're going to do a learner's minyan. And then the following one, we're going to go back to Torah study. But if anybody has opinions on this subject, you know, you love one, you hate the other, you want us to do both all the time, you can always email me and tell me about it. My impression thus far is that there are some people who love one and dislike the other, and they are exactly equal numbers of people on both sides. And most people are like, I love Shabbos at CBST, whatever we're doing is great. So if that's not the case, please disabuse me of that notion and tell me all about it in an email, okay?
But it's also the person who's teaching it. I mean, and I'm giving you a compliment, because some people can teach and you just feel like you're like, okay, they're in some place so high that you can't bring it to, you know, to the actual lay person. So I like the way you teach. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Stacy. That means a lot to me. And Margot, I love your pun. They are on either side of the Siman of the Nun. All right, everybody. I hope that you have a beautiful, beautiful Shabbat. Maybe I will see you for Havdalah. I'll be the one opening the room with Bruce tonight at 8. And I'm looking forward to it. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Be well. Hi, Alma and Judy.
Peace and quiet and health, everyone. Bye.
Amen, amen.
Okay.